make us, try and solve this problem, or, sign on what will solve this problem for everybody around the country, because it got so big so fast. And I think that in that way, because government always talks to you in terms of when you have a list of demands, you negotiate it.
Right.
But you can't negotiate something that is so much from the core and involves an entire system. Because in the beginning, they said that it's the housing protest in Israel. The thing is that when you say housing, you talk about everything. You talk about pensions and mortgages and rent and low pay and, how expensive it is to raise your kids and, welfare and public housing and affordable housing. You probably, because having a roof over your head and having something to eat are two basic things that any person should be able to afford in some way. So, out of just being a human being. So it was not something that we could have addressed in a way that it will not leave somebody out of it. And we want it to be inclusive, not disclusive.
It sounds a lot like the early days of Occupy, and until today, where instead of coming up with one demand as they did in Tahrir Square, we sort of consciously kept away from boiling everything down in order to be inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
But one difference, though, is that the movement in the United States has not produced many visible leaders. There isn't any individual or group of people where you could point to and say, if you want to know what's happening, talk to them. And that's been one of the challenges for journalists or for politicians trying to deal with it. It's not always clear what the entry point is to talk to the Occupy Wall Street movement. But in Israel, it seems like it was a very different situation where it became clear pretty quickly. How would you explain the differences between that?
First of all, the story, it's very difficult to change narrative when you started as, what happened is I work in media. So when I started the event and I was one person, the first day I opened the event, I already got a phone call from somebody who I have a mutual friend with who works in the news. And he said, I'm going to give you a small camera and start following it. Little did I know he wanted to, make a piece about how you cannot start a protest movement in Israel. That was his intention in the beginning. But it became like a series of, stories about what's going on in the protest through following me around. So, but in the beginning, I had no idea how big it's going to be. It's a Facebook event. As a Facebook event, it can be me, sitting alone, kind of being little man Tate, right? I was really scared from that movie because I always feel really anxious before my birthday, for example. So, it could have been 30,000 people or one. So the narrative started with a protagonist in a way. For the media, I didn't choose this. It kind of chose me in a way because I've chosen a career of being behind a camera.
Right.
So, and what was amazing is that that you have a protagonist, which is something that is very difficult to change in the middle of a story.
Right.
However, when it got bigger, then the media was searching for stories, and because there was no law that we created that said nobody can give interviews or something like that, it found them. And then all of a sudden people sitting at home could see themselves in the movement.
Because the media would choose different kinds of people to interview.
Yeah. In the end of the day, the person holding the camera is searching for something that will engage or will create some sort of,
I remember one of the things that I heard in the early days of OWS was, we're not going to, people were saying, let's create our own media instead of relying on the mainstream media to represent us.
Mm-hmm.
And there was an explicit sense that they wanted to not let the mainstream media pick and choose the issues, the people, the moments. They wanted to have more control over how that story got told. It sounds like in Israel that wasn't the mindset in the early days. Rather, it was a mutually beneficial relationship. The media was willing to give attention to the story.
You know what? The minute you become, what's really funny, in my opinion, is that you would think that the Israeli movement was very centralist, the way that it was, but I think that in a sense we had much less rules about how to, act as a movement.
Mm-hmm.
It was, every time we tried to make it organized and, kind of bring people from all the different tent cities to meet with each other and make decisions together, because it was so chaotic and everybody has an ego and everybody wants, and the problems are different from place to place. Every time we tried to do it, we failed miserably. It kind of crashed down into like inner politics, which nobody cares about when they sit at home and they want to try to join. I mean, the first goal should be to make it as, to get the message out there.
Right.
As much as possible.
Was there an effort of, say, the different the tent protest movements in different cities to try and organize, representatives or meetings?
Absolutely.
Describe that.
Well, I must say that I had a different experience. I would think that I would love to give you some contacts, by the way, to people who had a different perspective of what's going on inside the tent protest movement, because I had such a unique experience because I was so much in the eye of the storm. I mean, the media in a way created me into an analogy of what's going on. There are a lot of things that I do not know that happened because I was, engaging a certain sort of activity and like going around Rothschild Boulevard, and there were things happening all around. But every week we had, they had like people selected from every tent city to be representatives, and then we would meet once a week with those representatives from all over, because Israel is a small country, so it's possible to do so. Then we would meet, and then we would have conversations about how to make conversations and how are we going to make decisions. And it seemed like we're kind of stepping in the same place, but every time you would just say, you know what, do something. If you believe in something, just do it. Be productive,
right.
Then all of a sudden, I've never, like, even the way that I opened the event, it was, listen, this is what I'm doing, whoever wants, you can join. It was never like, I call you to do X, Y, Z. I say, this is what I'm doing, if you want, you can come. When we said we're having a protest, we didn't say everybody must come. We said, this is what we're doing. And then in the first one, 30,000 people came, So it's all about doing something, and if somebody is relating to what you're doing, they will follow,
right.
And in that way, there's some what you call like an organic leadership in different initiatives, and that it grows in very much in ratio to how good it is or how people think it's a good idea, and how much they believe in the personas that are creating them. So
good. Next question. So a lot of the folks here in Occupy are very sympathetic to the Palestinians seeking independence, and also for the situation of Palestinian citizens of Israel. And some of the news we get is that there was a tent that dealt with the right of return on Rothschild Boulevard, or that over time some of the Palestinian Israelis were participating in various ways. But without knowing too much, I want to ask you, do you think that the Palestinian citizens of Israel were included in the right way in the movement? Was there anything that you would have done differently so that the movement would be more representative of that population?
I think that what you're asking me is not fair, because I think that in a way, for them to participate, they need to participate. They need to take actions. Now, during the protest movement itself, there were some tent cities in Arab villages and Bedouin villages, and they were very much a part of it in that way. I think that in terms of like declaring it as as an issue, we didn't declare anything like that as an issue. We were trying to do the opposite, saying, you know what, whoever wants in, if you believe that there's need to be change, you're a part of it. As if we didn't speak of women's rights, or we didn't make them. You don't need to speak about women's rights in order to speak about women's rights, for example. So all of a sudden, when you all sit together and you don't make we're sitting together the issue, you're just talking about whatever is common ground, then you include But you know, I must say that it's been very interesting to, you know, I didn't get to see a lot of the involvement just because, as I said, I wasn't able to, you know, go across country and see everything. I know that a lot of things have happened during that time. I think that when you say that people in OWS are very preoccupied with, you know, this kind of issue, I want to ask you a question about...
You can.
Okay, then I will. About basically, I mean, the United States, you have something like 300 million people, very versatile, right? A lot of different types of communities. Yes. Some would say that there's racism in the United States as well.
There's racism.
And that there's also a lot of very religious communities, you know, and religion sometimes, especially when society, you know, is like, you know, developing in such a rapid sort of pace because of technology and everything, that, you know, the discourse becomes very difficult. So how do you deal with that when you are so incredibly bigger than, you know, like geography, even when you talk about geography, because you have so many more people and different judicial systems. We only have one to deal with in a way, and we're only almost 8 million, so...
Well,